Good evening. My name is Rachel Gotzel, and I'm the newly appointed chair of the Rent Guidelines Board, and So I'm happy to welcome you all to the meeting of the board for the preliminary vote. To determine the renewal lease adjustments for rent-stabilized housing units in New York, with leases beginning or being renewed on or after October 1st, 2014, and on or before September 30th, 2015. As many of you know, this is the preliminary vote. The final vote will take place following 5 further meetings, 4 of those meetings where we will invite testimony from the public to be held in 4 of the 5 boroughs. And those will be opportunities for us to listen to all of you, to hear about your experiences, and to be able to make a fully informed decision. You can thank your fellow participants who are waiting outside. They did give their assent to us beginning the meeting now, because I promised that they wouldn't miss anything exciting, because I will be required to read the entire proposed order into the record, and I can't sing, otherwise I would sing it into the record. But you really don't want me to sing. But our hope is that by the time we finish the introductory part of the meeting, all of the folks who are standing in line and waiting patiently will be able to hear the substance of the discussion. So again, you can thank those waiting outside and thank all of you. I will now take roll call of the board. Please respond if present. Magna Cruz? Present. Harvey Epstein?
I'm here.
Stephen Flax?
Here.
Shayla Garcia?
Here.
She's very popular, obviously. Cecilia Hosa?
Present.
Carol Shine?
Present.
David Wank?
Here.
Sarah Williams-Willard?
Present.
Rachel Gotzel, myself, obviously here. The proposed rental adjustments voting at this meetings, the proposed rent adjustments, and again, I will reiterate proposed, will be published in the city record and will be posted on our website, nycrgb.org. As I mentioned earlier, 4 public hearings for all of you and anyone else, obviously, in other boroughs to comment on the proposed guidelines will be held on the following dates, times, and locations. Our first public hearing will be Thursday, June 12th at the Repertory Theater of Hostos Community College in CUNY in the Bronx. That will take place between 5 and 8 p.m. Our second public hearing will be Monday, June 16th at the Emigrant Savings Bank Building, 4951 Chambers Street in Manhattan between 2 and 6 p.m. Our third public meeting will be Wednesday, June 18th at Brooklyn Borough Hall, 209 Joralemon Street. That will also be an evening meeting from 5 to 8 p.m. And our final public hearing will be Thursday, June 19th at Queensborough Hall between 5 and 8 p.m. Directions to these hearings can be found on our website, nycrgb.org, in the About Us section and under meeting schedule. Pre-registration to speak at all these hearings will begin tomorrow at 8 a.m. You can sign up by calling the Rent Guidelines Board offices at 212-385-2934. And for further information, again, please see our website, nycrgb.org. Yes, I can. 212-385-2934. And all of this information will, of course, be posted on the website, and there are copies of our meeting schedule here tonight. So there are hard copies of our meeting schedules here tonight. Now, before we hold those public hearings where you are all invited to testify, we are holding one further meeting of the board itself on May 29th in the Landmarks Preservation Commission conference room at the Municipal Building. Again, that's May 29th. And finally, I'll reiterate, the final vote will take place on June 23rd, starting at 6 p.m. It will be held at the Great Hall at Cooper Union, 7 East 7th Street, at the corner of 3rd Avenue in Manhattan, and we hope that the security will be a little quicker. Okay, so I will now begin by, as required by law, reading into the record The New York City Rent Guidelines Board proposed 2014 apartment order number 46. Proposed order number 26, apartments and lofts. 46, I thought I said that. Proposed order number 46, apartments and lofts, rent levels for leases commencing October 1st, 2014 through September 30th, 2015. Notice is hereby given pursuant to the authority vested in the New York City Rent Guidelines Board by the Rent Stabilization Law of 1969 as amended and the Emergency Tenant Protection Act of 1974 as amended, implemented by Resolution number 276 of 1974 of the New York City Council and extended by Chapter 97 of the Laws of 2011, and in accordance with the requirements of Section 1043 of the New York City Charter and the Rent Guidelines Board, hereby proposes the following levels of fair rent increases over lawful rents charged and paid on September 30th, 2014. These rent adjustments will apply to rent-stabilized apartments with leases commencing on or after October 1st, 2014 and through September 30th, 2015. Rent guidelines for loft units subject to Section 286, Subdivision 7 of the Multiple Dwelling Law are also included in this order. So this is essentially the structure for the preliminary vote we'll be making tonight. Proposed adjustments for renewal leases, apartments. Together with such further adjustments as may be authorized by law, the annual adjustments for renewal leases for apartments shall be for a one-year renewal lease commencing on or after October 1st, 2014, and on or before September 30th, 2015, the question is what percentage. For a two-year renewal lease commencing on or after October 1st, 2014, and on or before September 30th, 2015, the percentage is open. These adjustments shall apply to dwelling units in a structure subject to the partial tax exemption program under Section 421A of the Real Property Tax Law, or in a structure subject to Section 423 of the Real Property Tax Law as a redevelopment project. Proposed vacancy allowance for apartments, there shall be a vacancy allowance. Proposed additional adjustment for rent-stabilized apartment sublet under Section 2526.6 of the Rent Stabilization Code. In the event of a sublease governed by Subdivision E of Section 2526.6 of the Rent Stabilization Code, the allowance authorized by such subdivision shall be percentage. Proposed adjustment for lofts, units in the category of buildings covered by Article 7C of the Multiple Dwelling Law. The Rent Guidelines Board proposes the following levels of rent increases above the base rent as defined by Section 286, Subdivision 4 of the Multiple Dwelling Law for units to which these guidelines are applicable in accordance with Article 7C of the Multiple Dwelling Law. For one-year increase periods commencing on or after October 1st, 2014 and on or before September 30th, 2015, percentage. For two-year increase periods commencing on or after October 1st, 2014 and on or before September 30th, 2015, percentage. Vacant loft units proposal, there shall be vacancy allowance. Fractional terms proposal, for the purposes of these guidelines, any lease or tenancy for a period up to and including 1 year shall be deemed a one-year lease or tenancy, and any lease or tenancy for a period of over 1 year and up to and including 2 years shall be deemed a two-year lease or tenancy. Escalator clauses proposal, where a lease for a dwelling unit in effect on May 31st, 1968, or where a lease in effect on June 30th, 1974, for a dwelling unit which became subject to the Rent Stabilization Law of 1969 by virtue of the Emergency Tenant Protection Act of 1974 and Resolution number 276 of the New York City Council, contained an escalator clause for the increased cost of operation, and such clause is still in effect, the lawful rent on September 30th, 2014, over which the fair rent of this order is computed, shall include the increased rental, if any, due under such clause, except those charges which accrued within 1 year of the commencement of the renewal lease. Moreover, where a lease contained an escalator clause that the owner may validly renew under the code, unless the owner elects or has elected in writing to delete such clause, effective no later than October 1st, 2014, from the existing lease and all subsequent leases for such dwelling unit, The increased rental, if any, due under such escalator clause shall be offset against the amount of increase authorized under this order. I will take a moment and have some water. Special adjustments under prior orders proposal. All rent adjustments lawfully implemented and maintained under previous apartment orders and included in the base rent in effect on September 30th, 2014 shall continue to be included in the base rent for the purpose of computing subsequent rents adjusted pursuant to this order. Proposed special guideline. Under Section 26/513B1 of the New York City Administrative Code and Section 9E of the Emergency Tenant Protection Act of 1974, the Rent Guidelines Board is obligated to promulgate special guidelines to aid the State Division of Housing and Community Renewal in its determination of initial legal regulated rents for housing accommodations previously subject to the city rent and rehabilitation law, which are the subject of tenant application for adjustment. The Rent Guidelines Board hereby proposes the following special guidelines. For dwelling units subject to the rent and rehabilitation law on September 30th, 2014, which become vacant after September 30th, 2015, the special guideline shall be, ? Decontrolled units proposal. The permissible increase for decontrolled units as referenced in Order 3A, which become decontrolled after September 30th, 2014, shall be, ? Credits proposal. Rentals charged and paid in excess of the levels of rent increased established by this order shall be fully credited against the next month's rent. Statement of basis and purpose. The Rent Guidelines Board is authorized to promulgate rent guidelines governing apartment units subject to the Rent Stabilization Law of 1969 as amended and the Emergency Tenant Protection Act of 1974 as amended. The purpose of these guidelines is to implement the public policy set forth in Findings and Declaration of Emergency of the Rent Stabilization Law of 1969, Section 26/501 of the New York City Administrative Code, and in the legislative findings contained in the Emergency Tenant Protection Act of 1974, L. 1974, C. 576, Section 4, Subsection 2. The Rent Guidelines Board is also authorized to promulgate rent guidelines for loft units subject to Section 286, Subdivision 7 of the Multiple Dwelling Law. The purpose of the loft guidelines is to implement the public policy set forth in the legislative findings of Article 7C of the Multiple Dwelling Law, Section 280, dated May 5th, 2014. So how are we doing in terms of getting people into the room? Are we fairly full? I hope so.
There's still some people out there.
Rachel, I have a quick question. Just so we all know, on these public hearings, you mentioned the time frame of 5 to 8 p.m. on the evening hearings. But if someone's coming in, as long as they're there before 8, testimony might last longer. But that's what time we want people to sign up who haven't signed up in advance, right?
That's absolutely right. Our goal in the public hearings is to hear as many of you as possible. So we have the general time frame, and we do recommend that you pre-register. But if someone does come within the prescribed time frame and we haven't had a chance to hear everyone, we certainly will stay and listen. Again, the goal of these hearings is to gather information, to hear from as many people as possible, to hear from tenants, to hear from landlords, and to fill in the record as much as is humanly possible. So we are in somewhat of a difficult position because we still have people waiting, and we've now gone through, as you are obviously all aware, the essentially non-substantive part of the meeting. So our instinct is to take a little break to ensure that those who are waiting do have a chance to come in, but I know that you have all been waiting for a long time as well.
Rachel, I have a quick question. How much time do people have to testify?
At the public hearings, each person will have 3 minutes to testify, and the general norm is to have a landlord and then a tenant, landlord, to sort of go on opposing sides, again, to ensure that each person is heard and have people listen to in, sort of one and then the other. So you will have 3 minutes each at the public hearings, and again, landlord, tenant, or tenant, landlord, and we always switch and begin with different people depending upon what happened at the last meeting. But again, the goal really is to hear as many people as is possible. Sure.
And Rachel, can I have another question? If people sign up in advance, will they know based on when they sign up what time they'll be able to come testify, or will they get a gauge from the board staff about that?
I think it's impossible to know exactly what time anyone will testify, but if you do pre-register, you will obviously be able to testify sooner than if you haven't pre-registered, so we do recommend that. And it's also helpful for us to have a clear and orderly process, and that, of course, along with hearing everyone is a goal as well. So apparently there's one more order that I can perhaps read into the record. I wish we could hear questions, sir, and I wish this could be a broader discussion, but I promise we will have an opportunity for further discussions at the public hearings.
Just so I'm clear. So if I call and will I be given a number of where I signed up to testify? And so people will know that if they...
Yes, you will be given anyone who pre-registers will be given a number. And happy news, I have something else I can read into the record which will save us time later. So... Okay, so I will now read into the record the New York City Rent Guidelines Board proposed 2015 hotel order number 44. Proposed order number 44, hotels, rooming houses, single-room occupancy buildings, and lodging houses. Rent levels to be effective for leases commencing October 1st, 2014 through September 30th, 2015. Notice is hereby given pursuant to the authority vested in the New York City Rent Guidelines Board by the Rent Stabilization Law of 1969, as amended, and the Emergency Tenant Protection Act of 1974, as amended, implemented by Resolution Number 276 of 1974 of the New York City Council and extended by Chapter 97 of the Laws of 2011, and in accordance with the requirements of Section 1043 of the New York City Charter, that the Rent Guidelines Board hereby proposes the following levels of fair rent increases over lawful rents charged and paid on September 30th, 2014. Applicability. This order shall apply to units and buildings subject to the hotel section of the Rent Stabilization Law, Sections 26/504C and 26/506 of the New York City Administrative Code, as amended, or the Emergency Tenant Protection Act of 1974, C 576, Section 4, Subsection 5, A7. With respect to any tenant who has no lease or rental agreement, the level of rent increase established herein shall be effective as of 1 year from the date of the tenant's commencing occupancy, or as of 1 year from the date of the last rent adjustment charged to the tenant, or as of October 1st, 2014, whichever is later. The anniversary date, which will also serve as the effective date for all subsequent Rent Guidelines Board hotel orders, unless the board shall specifically provide otherwise in the order. Where a lease or rental agreement is in effect, this order shall govern the rent increase applicable on or after October 1st, 2014, upon expiration of such lease or rental agreement, but in no event prior to 1 year from the commencement date of the expiring lease, unless the parties have contracted to be bound by the effective date of this order. Proposed rent guidelines for hotels, rooming houses, single-room occupancy buildings, and lodging houses. Pursuant to its mandate to promulgate rent adjustments for hotel units subject to the Rent Stabilization Law of 1969, as amended, Section 26/510E of the New York City Administrative Code, the Rent Guidelines Board hereby proposes the following rent adjustments. The allowable level of rent adjustment over the lawful rent actually charged and paid on September 30th, 2014 shall be 1. Residential Class A apartments, hotels, %percentage. 2. Lodging houses, %percentage. 3. Rooming houses, Class B buildings containing less than 30 units, %percentage. 4. Class B hotels, %percentage. 5. Single-room occupancy buildings, MDL Section 248 SROs, %percentage. New tenancies proposal, vacancy allowance is permitted under this order. Additional charges proposal. It is expressly understood that the rents collectible under the terms of this order are intended to compensate in full for all services provided without extra charge on the statutory date for the particular hotel dwelling unit or at the commencement of the tenancy if subsequent thereto. No additional charges may be made to a tenant for such services, however such charges may be called or identified. Statement of basis and purpose. The Rent Guidelines Board is authorized to promulgate rent guidelines governing hotel units subject to the Rent Stabilization Law of 1969 as amended, and the Emergency Tenant Protection Act of 1974 is amended. The purpose of these guidelines is to implement the public policy set forth in Findings and Declaration of Emergency of the Rent Stabilization Law of 1969, Section 26/501 of the New York City Administrative Code, and in the legislative findings contained in the Emergency Tenant Protection Act of 1974, L. 1974, Section 576, Section 4, subsection 2, dated May 5th, 2014. And here we are again. Okay, any board questions about the proposed hotel order or the proposed law before we engage in any substantive discussion, which we hope will commence when all of the folks who are waiting outside are present? Questions about public hearings? Okay, thank you all for your patience. Again, in light of the time and with respect to all of you, I think we will begin, and we will obviously share the information. It's being recorded with those who are unable to be actually present in the room. As many of you know,
Rachel, I just want to be clear that I find this to really not anything you've done or the staff has done, but the idea that there's 40 or 50 people who've come to listen to us, and because of the security issue, the space is an issue. I think in the future, if we were to go and come to a space like this, I think this is something we really need to consider, the accessibility of our spaces. It's a public meeting, and I know you care deeply about this, but I would really hearken our staff and you, as we look forward to other spaces, to make sure that the most open and accessible spaces available for the public.
Thank you, Harvey. Obviously, as you know, the staff and all of us care deeply about ensuring that people are able to hear the discussion, and at the public hearings, we certainly will care deeply about accessibility, so we will look forward to spaces that are as accessible as possible and that have the speediest security possible. And again, we do appreciate all of your patience. We appreciate those who are waiting outside, and we will do our best to ensure that everyone is able to hear the discussion to the extent possible. According to past customs, we hear proposals for rent adjustments either from the tenants or the owner side. We like to alternate who begins as a matter of fairness. Last year, at the preliminary vote, the owners began, and therefore, for this preliminary vote, we'd like to open the floor to the tenants to make a proposal for a rent adjustment for this year. So we very much appreciate the sentiment, and I hope you will all respectfully listen to the tenant representatives, who I know you think highly of, as we hear their proposal.
Thank you, Rachel. I would like to start by reminding us of our duty, which is to review, and I'm just going to read out the law so that we're all on the same page when we're going forward. We're to review the economic condition of residential real estate industry in New York City, including prevailing and projected factors such as real estate taxes, sewer and water rates, gross operation costs, including insurance, government fees such as costs as fuel, labor, costs and availability of financing, including effective rates of interest, overall supply of housing accommodation, and overall vacancy rates. relevant data from the accurate and projected cost of living indices for the affected area, and any other data made available to us. And it says Ed. And I would like to, at this time, talk a little bit about the struggle that we're facing in New York City, right? Everyone is going through a tough time. Landlords of rent-regulated buildings are making 30% returns in profits. While this year income and affordability study shows that wages continue to fall, unemployment isn't any better, homelessness and housing court eviction continue to rise. New York tenants, on average, are paying $979 in rent and $1,058 of their income, right? So think about what that effect that has on a family, right? We have to take into consideration when making our decision that we're putting some families in homeless shelters, that there are currently 50,000 homeless families, people in shelters every night. Our decision will not only impact single parents of children, right, who can barely get by as it is right now. These parents will make the decision of feeding their children, paying the electric bill, buying a new pair of sneakers for their kids, or spending more time or working more hours. This is what our decision means to families of rent-stabilized buildings. But the increase we're proposing is not only increase to affect tenants, right? Tenants are not only affected by this increase, but they're affected by major capital improvements, MCIs, individual apartment improvements, apartment vacancy, which are between 16 and 20%. Harassments that tenants face, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. Air conditioning fees, washing machine fees, legal fees, late fees, damage fees, and they're even faced with buyouts, right? Whether they can take that buyout to get a better home. Just last week, I was testifying in front of City Council about tenant harassment and what it means, how much they fight to stay in their homes. The organized tenants of the three-borough pool, 42 buildings that were being foreclosed, 1,500 units, 1,500 apartments, have seen their rents go up every year by the percent set in this board. While living with no heat, no hot water, being charged illegal third-month rents, and living in deplorable conditions. And I invite all of you to go to these buildings. And in light of all of this evidence, we are still talking about whether we're increasing rents. We encourage that we have a real dialogue of whether this is merited based on all of the evidence that we see, right? This year we learned that, throughout the city we've seen an increase in revenue for landlords, and so landlords are making about a 5% increase, right, in revenue every year. And let's put that in context to what tenants see an increase in their wages. Just this last year, wages only went up by 1.3%. And so we are supposed to pay 5% increases on 1.3% increases in wages. And so I feel like as a board, we're not here to widen the gap of what landlords make. We're here to make a fair decision about what increases we need to see. We heard from Timothy Collins that 1/3 of all tenants in New York City are burdened in paying more than 50% of their income in rent. That's the highest amount that we've ever had in recorded history, right? Like, that's just the highest we've had. We were also reminded by Greg Lobo-Jost that while making this decision, we need to consider what kind of city we need to live in, right? A city that includes all of us. It is important, right, for us to have the conversation about what our responsibility is, right? Not to really preserve what rent stabilization is, but also make it equitable, right? For years, we've seen constant increases, and what have we seen for tenants? Decreases, right? We just pay more out of pocket. We are here to on a very important, charge, right? We're here to simulate what fair rent levels are for both landlords and tenants, not only landlords. Time and time again, this mission has been ignored. The board has consistently ignored its mandate to make a fair decision. As a tenant rep, it's my responsibility to make sure that there is a balance in the boat and that we're having these conversations, which is why this year, I hope that we rise to the charge as a board, right, in calling for a rent rollback of... Thank you. Right. And for this reason, I'm proposing a rent rollback of -6%, a bracket, right, to 0. I'm not gonna be able to read this, right? -6% to 0 for a 1-year lease, and -2% to 0 for a 2-year lease. This rent rollback is not a favor for tenants, it's not a favor for landlords, right? This is to put us on a playing level field with everyone who deserves it, right? Since 2008, we have deserved a rent rollback, and this year we demand one. Again, I encourage you to think about what kind of city we want to live in, and I again propose a -6% to 0% rollback for a 1-year lease and -2% to 0% for a 2-year lease. And that includes, right, 0 vacancy allowances. That includes zeros on all of the amazing stuff that Rachel was reading through. Very nice for us, right? So we only want to see a -6% and everything else 0 down the line.
Okay, again, thank you all for your enthusiasm, but it is important that we be able to actually hear each other in the process. Do we have a second for this motion?
I second it.
And can I ask for discussion from the board?
Can I say something, Rachel? I do want us all to consider what we're talking about here. We've heard, as Shayla has articulately talked about, the struggles of New Yorkers. And it's clear to us, with the net operating income going up each year for landlords, at least for the last 8 years, and net income going down for tenants, the only thing we can do, or the best thing we can do for tenants right now, is roll back the rents. And the data really supports it. We heard panelists from the landlord side and panelists from the tenant side, and it was clear tenants are struggling, tenants are suffering, and evictions are up. And we heard from the landlord side when they said, well, we don't really believe the net operating income is going up as high as they say, or we don't really think that we're making as much money as people think, and we really need an increase. The reality is we want the city to be the city we believe in. If we want the message that we've had about the tale of two cities, we really need to vote in favor of this rollback. I encourage all the board members to do that today.
Thank you, Harvey. Other discussion from board members? Okay. Before we vote, obviously what Shayla described is incredibly moving and incredibly accurate in her discussion of the challenge that tenants have faced over last years, the difficulty that tenants have experienced in this economy, the difficulty with the unemployment rates, and the incredible challenge that rents have imposed on tenants. it is, as Shayla noted, the mandate of this board to evaluate the data as set forth by several factors. And so crucially to our mandate is to consider the economic conditions of the residential real estate industry. It is incumbent upon us to look carefully at the costs that landlords have to pay. It is incumbent upon us to look carefully at the projected costs of living that tenants experience. It is also incumbent upon us to evaluate such other data as may be made available, and we're looking to all of you for that other data in the public hearings. We are in an information gathering period. We are in a process where we are filling in the data that the ABLE Rent Guidelines Board staff has put together, and that is a process that has to unfold. And so I think it's important for everyone here to understand that this board takes its mandate extraordinarily seriously. This board takes the tenants' experience extremely seriously. We know the burdens that you've all faced, and we care deeply about those. It is also our obligation to hear from the landlords and to understand the challenges that they face as they attempt to maintain and preserve affordable housing for the city. So the landlords have a role to play as well in the goal that we all have of having our city be a livable city where the housing stock is well maintained, where the housing stock is strong, and where every tenant has a good place to live. So I do see this next several weeks as an opportunity for us to hear from both sides, to listen carefully and thoughtfully and reflectively to both sides, and to make a decision on June 23rd that reflects all of the factors that the law requires us to take into account, and that ideally will leave us in a place where tenants are less burdened, where landlords have sufficient revenue to maintain the apartments as you all deserve to have them maintained, and where we live in a city that we can all be proud of.
Can I just say that I want to remind everyone that we are asking for a rent rollback, right? This is not, we're and not only that, but we're not asking for a handout, right? At the landlord's reps, when they came to testify in front of us in the invited testimony, and some of you were there, said that they don't want to come to the RGB and ask for a handout. Tenants deserve what we're asking for. This is not something we're just, coming up out of the thin air. I mean, we've read the data, we've looked at the stuff. We deserve a rent rollback, and this is why we deserve that -6 to 0. We can't ask for anything more, and I feel like we should be really taking that into consideration when we are, having these discussions, and we're not really discussing anything.
Does anyone on the board have any further discussion? Then I'll call for a vote. Magna Cruz?
No.
Harvey Epstein?
Yes.
Stephen Flax?
No.
Shayla Garcia?
Yes.
Cecilia Hossa?
Yes.
Carol Shine?
No.
David Wank?
No.
Sarah Williams Willard?
No.
And as the chair, I'll have to vote no. I would not, again, we do, I would ask everyone to please, allow us to continue the discussion, to hear from the landlords' representatives, and then to hear subsequent discussion. And we do appreciate your courtesy. We take this responsibility and all of you very seriously, and please do allow us to have our process. Landlords representatives?
Chairwoman Godsill, thank you very much for the opportunity to address this board. At this time, before we make a formal motion for what we believe to be the appropriate preliminary range of guidelines that this board should consider,
I would ask everyone to please allow the landlords' representatives to make their motion. We want to hear you at the public hearings, and I would ask you to hear us as we engage in this preliminary discussion of the guidelines.
I would like to introduce my colleague on the board. She is a new member representing the owners, Sarah William Willard will make a few comments regarding some of the points that the tenants made.
As my fellow board members know by now, I tend to be a fairly mathematically driven board member, and for me to understand both sides of the equation as well as the charge that we have, I've had to take a look at some numbers supplied by the great team that we have that provides empirical evidence for us, and I just want to clarify a couple of statements and just, again, put some facts forth to the board as preamble to the owner recommendations. Want to let the board members know that from 1990 to 2012, which was, I felt like a fairly statistically significant analysis, and it happens to also be the first statistic that Shayla had given us, which was that NOIs for owners have gone up 30% in that same period of time. However, I do want to clarify that that's an aggregate amount over that 22-year period. That's not an annual number. And so the great team here was able to parse out average annual increases, straight line average annual increases from 1990 to 2012 for me. And these are some facts that I'd like for you guys to all consider in your decision making. Our price index for building expenses from 1990 to 2013 went up on average 5.1%. If you slice it a different way, which is a new way that we've been looking at it, which is the RPIE, longitudinal change in cost. So it takes the price index but modifies it to be a little bit more, have a slightly different weighting. That has increased on average annually by 4.3%. Another interesting point was that the RGB increase for one-year leases on average since 1990 is actually 3%, which, we're talking about landlord income or owner income, but this income figure, the 30%, includes commercial income as well as destabilized rent income. Unfortunately, there's no way to isolate stabilized income from the overall calculation. But even when you include all of these factors, my fellow board members, the average change in nominal income from 1990 to 2012 actually grew 3.82%. So I just wanted to clarify that. And then the last two, and then the last two facts that I just wanted to present for people to consider is that the operating expenses, again, if you use the price index, last year went up 5.7%, and when you adjust it for the RPIE way of looking at things, that went up 5.2%. So I don't think that when we are evaluating the first part of our mandate, we don't, the owner side, and hopefully more of you would consider that operating expenses have gone up significantly this year, and also take into consideration the long view of these increases for the buildings as well over time.
So in furtherance,
Everyone, again, I would ask you, we will have 4 public hearings, and we very much want to hear your point of view. But it is important for us to be able to have this vote, to listen thoughtfully to each of the board members. And again, we do understand your strong feelings, we understand the challenges you face, but please do allow the board members to speak. Thank you.
so in furtherance of,
Excuse me.
thank you. In furtherance of the information that we have presented to the board, I wish to, at this time, on behalf of the tens of thousands of property owners that supply the largest private source of rental housing in the city of New York, I wish to make the following motion for the 2014 guidelines that we believe the board should preliminarily adopt for apartments and lofts. My motion has 3 parts. First, based in large part on the commensurate rent adjustment formulas as reported in this year's Price Index of Operation Costs report. This report, as we all know, is prepared very thoroughly by our staff. I propose that the board preliminarily consider a range of 1- and 2-year lease renewals, as this board has traditionally done. I want to make clear, however, that by proposing a range, I am not suggesting that the low end of the range should ultimately be adopted. I am simply proposing a range for purposes of continuing the discussion as the board receives further information and testimony on appropriate final guidelines over the next 7 weeks. To that end, I move for the following: that the 1-year renewal guideline for apartments and lofts be in the range between 3.6% and 5.5%.
Please, again, we can't even hear the proposal in order to vote for it. We can't make any votes if we don't hear the proposal. So please allow us to hear the proposal.
Again, be in a range between 3.6 and 5.5, or a minimum dollar amount of between $36 and $55, whichever is higher. In addition, that the 2-year renewal guideline for apartments and lofts be in the range between 4.3% and 9.5%, or a minimum dollar amount between $43 and $95, whichever is higher.
Again,
Continue. Okay. Secondly, I propose that there be a sublet allowance of 10%. And thirdly, that the special guideline and the guideline for decontrolled units be the greater of the maximum base rent plus 50%, plus a fuel cost adjustment reflective of the rise in the fuel oil component of the PIOC this year. So as to the fuel oil adjustment, I'm not proposing a specific number, but I'm stating it as an addition to the 50% above the MBR. Or, again, this is the greater of, or the HUD fair market rent as adjusted for apartment size and utilities. So in sum, the 1-year renewal.
Please allow her to speak. This is a democratic process, and we can't vote if we can't hear.
Generally, you need that motion before you vote.
So in sum, just to be clear, we are proposing a range for the 1 year, 3.6 to 5.5, or a minimum dollar amount, $36 or $55. For the 2-year, again, another range, 4.3% to 9.5%, or a minimum dollar between $43 and $95. And again, this is for purposes of discussion as we continue to hear further information and testimony during the next weeks. Thank you.
Is there any discussion from the board?
Was there a second?
Was there a second for that proposal?
I second it.